We're doing a brand new series of lessons and calling How to Grow a Church. How to Grow a Church. And we're looking at the miracle where Jesus fed the 5,000 men with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Let me use a scripture text here from Mark, the 6th chapter, verse 33. But the multitude saw them departing, and many knew him and ran there on foot from all the cities. And they arrived before them and came together to them. This is the story of Jesus when he feeds the 5,000 men. It gives us 6 different church growth principles in this story. We examined the previous lesson. We talked about growing through vision, that is where all growth begins. It starts with somebody sees the right thing. Growing through vision. In this particular lesson, we want to talk about growth through planning. Growth through planning. Jesus had a plan. In fact, that's what John said about it when Jesus asked the disciples, well, what do you have? And they began to research to see what they had, but he said Jesus knew what he would do. He had a plan. Someone has well described this statement, this position as saying, to fail to plan is to plan to fail. That's a good way of saying it. To fail to plan is to plan to fail. And the truth is, we've got a lot of people that are planning to fail because they are not developing proactive provision. They're not looking for ways to what they can do to make a difference. And it's a basic principle of life. Churches don't grow because we can't find any more people like us. And we don't have a plan for anything else. We've already found all the people that are like us, and so we stop growing. Do you have a plan? I hope in this lesson I'm able to give you some pointers on developing a good plan. Now, as we read this story, we discover the disciples had already given up on the multitude before they even checked their resources. They don't even know what they have. And so Jesus said to them, what do you have? They don't know. So he said, go and see. Now, the truth is, just because we can't do everything, it's not an excuse for doing nothing. And yet so many people are that way. They will look at the multitude and it's bigger than their faith, and so it overwhelms them, and they say, we can't do anything, just send them away. We can't help. No. That's the wrong decision. Just because you can't do everything doesn't excuse you from doing something. See, God has gifted every one of us. God has given us time. He's given us talent. He's given us treasure. He's given us these gifts. What do we have? That's what Jesus asked them. He challenged them. How many loaves do you have? Go and see. How many loaves do you have? You'll find that in Mark 6 and 38. It is our responsibility, and particularly if we are in spiritual leadership, to check our resources, to see what God has given us. What are the gifts and talents that God has given to us, that God has given to our people? That's where we begin. We build upon that. And so Jesus challenged them. Go and see. That's our responsibility. It's our responsibility to find out what are the gifts, what are the talents, what are the treasures that God has given to us. The truth is, many churches fail to grow because they never plan. They're already planning to fail because they're not putting a plan of action together. How are you going to reach your community? How are you going to win your neighbor to Christ? How are you going to share the good news with those that do not know about Jesus Christ? That is our responsibility. Our responsibility as spiritual leaders is to create a plan of action. A plan of action. How are we going to go about attempting to fulfill the Great Commission? That's not just for somebody else. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. No, that is our responsibility as a believer. Every believer has a responsibility of helping to fulfill the Great Commission. So what is our plan of action? Now, as a spiritual leader, and I've been involved in Christian leadership for many, many years. And this is one of the things that I discovered. I discovered that small churches can do anything that big churches can do if they will just do two things. Two things. Number one, they have to plan ahead. You've got to develop a plan of action. You must plan ahead. And number two, you've got to work with other people, with other small churches. You've got to learn to work together to accomplish the good. Now, what happens so many times is small churches look at the great need and they give up on it without even trying. And they say, we're just a little church. We can't do it. No. You can do something. The first thing you must do is to develop a plan of action. Plan ahead and work together. If you will do those things, you can do anything that large churches can do. But what many small churches do, and because most churches are small churches, they do nothing, or they do very little. They only take care of their own personal needs. They never reach out to their community. They never attempt to do great things for God. They never attempt to feed the multitude because they're only a small church. It's no excuse, my friend, no excuse at all. Jesus only had 12 disciples, 12 apostles, and yet he fed 5,000 men plus the women and children. So it's not an excuse to sit back and say, we can do nothing. Now, let me give you the things that I've learned that we must put in action as spiritual leaders if we're going to develop a plan of action. Number one, as spiritual leaders, it's our responsibility to help our people discover their spiritual gifts. That is our responsibility as spiritual leaders. As pastors, it's your responsibility to help your people discover their spiritual gifts. It's very similar to parenting. The Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go. Now notice, it did not say teach up a child. It said train up a child. That means together with them, you are discovering their gifts, helping them discover their gifts so they can know which direction they are supposed to go. The truth is, the greatest resources of any church is not money. It's not money. And so just take that off the table. Stop talking about the money, because that's not the great treasure that God has given to you. The great gifts that God has given are the abilities, the talents that God has given to the people. Every one of us have certain gifts and talents, things that we can do. Some things we can do better than others can do them. We need to focus on discovering what are the gifts that God has given to me, that God has given to the people that I lead. If we have not taken the time to do that, we need to do what Jesus said. Go and see. Go find out what you have before you start giving up on feeding the multitude. Now, as with the disciples, you're going to discover the same thing is true in our lives. Many times, these great gifts are with the youth, with the young people. In fact, that's the way they describe this boy. He's just a lad. He's not even a big boy yet. He's not a young man. He's just a lad. And yet, the lad had the key to feeding the multitude. So as spiritual leaders, we must give our children an opportunity of bringing their gifts to Jesus, whatever those gifts and talents are. God has been so good and so gracious to me in my life, but one of the main reasons I have been able to accomplish what I've been able to accomplish is because I started very young. I started preaching when I was 11 years of age. 11 years of age, and I'm already preaching to the church. How I thank God for those pastors that were wise enough, discerning enough, that they saw something in me that I didn't even know was there. They discovered it. They found it. And because of that, I've been able to develop my teaching gift that God had placed within me just as a child. So we have that same responsibility. The responsibility of bringing the children to Jesus. There's a lad here that's got 5 loaves and 2 fish. They helped him bring his gift to Jesus. Now, I want to caution you here, and it's a big caution. Never treat a gift as something that's small. As something that is small. That's the way the disciples were responding to this. In John the 6th chapter and verse 9, this is Andrew, and he is saying to Jesus, there is a boy here that has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they for so many? In other words, he's making that the boy's gift is just a little thing, a little gift. And yet the truth of it is, the boy's gift was the key to feeding the multitude. And you're going to discover the same thing is true within your life. That many times the great gifts that God has placed within your church is not with grandma and grandpa. No, not with their bank account. No, no, no. It's with the grandson or with the granddaughter. God has put talents and abilities in them. And we look at them as just small, little people, little gifts. That is a mistake, because so many times the key to feeding the multitude is going to be found with the youth. And so I challenge you in this area. Don't overlook the children. Don't overlook their gifts. Start researching. Develop plans of action. Find out what it is that God has gifted your people, gifted your church, gifted your children, and start helping them bring their gifts to Jesus. Now, here's the second thing I want to talk about. We not only have to help our people find the gifts that they have, and many times they're hidden. You have to search for them. You have to do your research, and you have to look for these gifts. But the second thing you must do is you must train your people for service. Train your people for service. Now, the reason that I emphasize this point is because this is a common mistake that is made among church leadership. Churches have a terrible reputation of giving people assignments without giving them the training to fulfill their assignment. But we need to change that reputation. We, as spiritual leaders, have a responsibility of developing a plan to help people cultivate their gifts. We need to help them develop their gifts. They can do a better job if we will get them the right training. It is bad leadership. It's poor leadership that gives people assignments but does not give them the training and equipping that they need to fulfill those assignments. It doesn't matter what area of the church it may be. If we're going to have a prayer ministry in the church, then teach people how to pray. Teach them the different aspects of prayer. If we're going to have a worship ministry in the church, then we need to teach people how to worship with excellence. You've got to teach them the principles of it. Whatever the ministry that you're going to develop in the church, it is our responsibility to develop a plan of action. Let me give you a paraphrase from the book of Ephesians, the 4th chapter, verse 7 through 12, where he talks about, and he gave apostles and prophets and evangelists, shepherds and teachers. Here was the purpose for it: to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ. Did you notice what he said? He did not say that it was the pastor's responsibility to do all the spiritual work. No, He said our number one job is to equip the people for the work of ministry. We need to be training others, helping them reach their maximum efficiency, helping them fulfill their potential. That's our job. Our number one job as spiritual leaders is to equip our people, to train them, to develop them, to help them to be able to do the very best job that they possibly can for Jesus Christ. Don't set someone up for failure. If you're going to give them an assignment, give them the training that they need to fulfill that assignment. When you look at it, for instance, in the world of sports. In the world of sports, with every team, you've got a coach. And the coach's primary responsibility is help the players reach their maximum effectiveness, to be their best. That's why they give the athletes all this training. Why do athletes practice? It's quite obvious why they practice. The reason that athletes practice is because they want to win. They want to win. Now, the same is true with our people. This is not just true on the sports field. It's true in our churches. Our people want to be winners. We need to set them up to win. And the way that we set them up to win is helping them develop their spiritual gifts, giving them the proper training. Now, as spiritual leaders, because we're working with other spiritual leaders, we should always be discovering different plans of action, different things that different churches are doing, and learn how that we can use those things to edify our own people. It's not mimicking what we're seeing. No, we are learning, and because we are learning, now we're taking what we have learned, we're putting it into a plan of action to help our people reach their effectiveness. Paul loved to talk about sports because there's so many parallels between the natural and the spiritual. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9:25, every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath. We do it for an imperishable one. Boy, that is so true. It's a different game that we're playing. This is the game of life. This is the game of life, and we don't want it to end in death. We want this life to go into eternal life. And so we teach our people, we develop our people, we train our people to reach their maximum effectiveness. We're training our people how to be winners, how that they can be victorious in the race of life, how they can run to win. That is our responsibility as spiritual leaders. Now, here's the third thing that I want to talk about. The third thing is we must release our people for ministry. Number one, you have to find out what are the gifts and talents that God has given to your people. Number two, you train them to be able to exercise those gifts. Number three, there comes a point where you stop training and you plug them in. In fact, some of the greatest training that they're going to get is on-the-job training. On-the-job training. As you begin to give them assignments, things that they do, you're releasing them for ministry. As good leaders, that's our job. Our job is training and equipping the people. But there comes a point where you've got to involve them, get them involved in helping others. See, this is what being a good pastor is all about. It's very basic. It's very simple. Good pastors are looking for the right people. They're putting them in the right place. They're giving them the right training, and then they are releasing them to do the work of ministry. Let me repeat that again because it's such a basic, simple plan, but that's what good pastoring is all about. It's looking for the right people and putting them in the right place, giving them the right training, and then releasing them for the work of ministry. If we do that and do it effectively, we're going to be fulfilling our job as a pastor. There's too many people that they look at the pastor the wrong way. They look at him as the spiritual leader, that he's supposed to do all the work. See, this is the failure. It's one of the reasons that the majority of churches are small, is because too many pastors are good men, but they are not good leaders. They haven't learned and developed the skills of training and equipping others. And because of this, their people believe that their pastor is supposed to do the spiritual work of the church. And that's the reason the church remains small, is because you've only got one person that's doing all the spiritual work, one person that's doing all the visitation, one person that's praying for the sick, one person that's training and equipping others, one person that's doing all the spiritual work. Well, you've limited the work that can be accomplished to just one man. That is a big mistake. Our job as spiritual leaders is to train and equip the people to do the work of ministry. And if we do that and do it right, then we're going to be fulfilling our gifts, our talents. It's simply not true that God called one person to do all the spiritual work. No, our assignment is different than that. The assignment that God has given to us is training our people to do the work of the ministry. It's a basic mistake that churches are making. And because they continue to make this mistake, they stop growing. It's not God's will. God's will is for us to continue to be reaching out to others and training others. But the main reason that most churches don't grow is you have only one person that's trying to do the work of ministry. That is a mistake. It will never work. Jesus didn't do it that way. No. The Apostle Paul didn't do it that way. No. How did Jesus operate? When Jesus got ready to change the world, he chose a group of 12 men and he began to disciple them. He called them his disciples because they were learning of him. It said he chose 12 that they might be with him and then that he might send them out to preach, to teach. The assignment has never changed, friend. Jesus is our ultimate example. Who are the ones that you are training, that you are equipping for ministry? Who are the people that you are empowering, that you are taking what you have learned and sharing with them? If we're not doing that, then we're simply not following the example of Jesus. The example of Jesus is choose a team, appoint some people, ask some people to come close to you and begin to pour into them what God has poured into you. If you will do that, you will be amazed at what can be accomplished. See, the way that Jesus fed the multitude was not by him directly feeding the multitude. No, he chose to do it through others. There were certain things that Jesus had to do, and Jesus had to develop the plan of action. He had a very good plan. As John said, he himself knew what he would do. He knew what he was going to do. They didn't know, so he's teaching them. The way that he fed the multitude was he took the loaves and fishes and divided and gave it to the disciples. The disciples gave it to the multitude. That's the plan of action for us today. That's the way that we need to operate. It's the way that the multitude was fed then. It's the way the multitude will be fed within our lives. And yet I see so many good men and women, so many good people, that they have a call, a gift of God upon their life, and they've devoted themselves to serving Christ, to serving his church, and yet they're doing the work of ministry all alone. That is a mistake. God never called us to do it alone. He called us to multiply ourselves by training and equipping others. If we will learn that secret, if we will develop a plan, a clear plan, and the way to do that is look at your people. What are the gifts that God has given them? then train them, equip them, then release them for service. There's basically three things that I look for in every opportunity. In every opportunity, I look for the gifts that God has given to me. What are the things that God has given me? Number two, I look for not just my gifts, but what are the resources that I have? Not only I have the gift of teaching, but what are the resources that I have to share this with others? And number three, I look for the need. I look around to see where is the greatest need, where I make a difference. Where those three circles come together, my gifts, the resources, and the need, is this one thing I do. I pull it together at that point. I've got a plan of action. Now I know what I'm going to do, what I'm going to try to accomplish. And so I challenge you, do the same thing. Develop a plan of action. As I said in the beginning of this lesson, to fail to plan is to plan to fail. God never created any of us to be failures. He called all of us to be victorious, overcomers, more than conquerors through Jesus Christ. And so I challenge you, develop a plan of action. A plan of action. Draw those around you that are your leaders and ask them to contribute, because all of us are smarter than any one of us. Get their thoughts and ideas. Find out what their talents are. Look for the opportunities. We call them needs. So many times the opportunity comes disguised as a need. But if we will develop that plan of action, then begin to act upon the plan. Work the plan that God has given to you, and you will be amazed at the multitude that God will use you and your people to be able to feed. May God bless you on your Christian journey as we learn how to feed the multitude.